Let's delve into 35 of the most disturbing things caught on police body cam footage. On May 24, 2022, in Uvalde, Texas, this traffic camera captured a suspicious person dressed in black walking into a school. Switching to the camera installed in the hallway, the school's hallway captures a young man walking towards a class with a rifle at hand. As he approaches the classroom, a child peeks from the other hallway and sees the armed suspect and immediately runs away, just before gunshots could be heard from the classroom, where the armed criminal was now. A few minutes after the crime had begun, some armed and vested police officers made their way into the campus, but did not act until the military took charge. Armed with guns, bulletproofs, shields, and helmets, they confronted the perpetrator, ultimately leading to the loss of his life. In this terrifying video from Atlanta, a man could be seen walking out of the store towards his black sedan, but he is not alone, as another man with a gun in his waistband is following him. It looks like there is an argument between both men, but then things escalate when the first man who exists in the store goes to his car and pulls out an AK-style pistol. Moments later, both start firing shots at one another. The crime scene looks chaotic as bullets are flying everywhere, even hitting the car's windshields. Eventually, the suspect runs off, but the driver continues firing at him. With the other shooter now completely gone from the scene, the driver's trying to leave too, but when a woman comes out holding her shoulder, it appears that she was shot. In Moscow, Russia, this secret camera captures two men in track jumpers seated with a man in a suit having a discussion. All of a sudden, one of the thugs gets on his feet and starts harassing the suited man. It turns out that the police were secretly monitoring the meeting from another location with the help of these cameras, and they were waiting for the right moment to barge in and make the arrest. The clueless thugs can be seen brutalizing the pretentious, helpless businessman, and in no time they pin him on the floor, and then one of the criminals reaches for a wire. At this point, they were already about to unalive their victim. Wrapping the wire around his neck, they start choking him, and at that moment, the suited law enforcers intercede, apprehending the criminals. This body camera footage shows an Oklahoma City cop highlighting his vehicle and then trying to call the attention of a man in red. The cop asks the civilian if he was having a beef with someone off the road, and the man replies that he was just trying to talk to someone. As the cop approached the suspect, the man started walking off, and at that point, the police officer ordered him to stop in his tracks and then proceeded to question him about whether he had any weapons on and request permission to search. As the officer innocently reaches to search, the suspect reaches for a gun that was hung on him and then shoots the police officer. He continued shooting at the vested officer, who was now running to take cover. The officer turns and shoots back, making the criminal hide behind a white sedan. Calling for backup, the cop approaches the man in red's hiding place, but the suspect had already dashed from that spot, trying to escape in the police vehicle. The cop announced that he was injured, and he then proceeded to take cover behind some trash cans. Unable to flee using the police car, the suspect takes off on foot, while the officer gives an update on the situation over the radio as he tries to stop his leg from bleeding. Civilians came out to aid the officer, and then a patrol helicopter captured the suspect lying on the floor. Apparently, he was also wounded. The law offender named Wilson was eventually arrested, and officers attended to his injury before taking him to the hospital, where he eventually died due to how fatal his injury was. In this next video, CCTV spotted a middle-aged man in traditional attire, suspiciously walking by the street. On getting to the parking lot, this tattooed man realizes he looked confused, like he had forgotten something, so he turns back and runs in the direction that he came from. Back to the pavement, when he walked past earlier, the suspect suddenly stopped as a bunch of men ran in his direction. The next thing that happens would leave you shocked. The traditionally dressed man kicks one of the runners and bashes him on the face. One of the fleeing men whops out a gun and starts shooting, while another runs into a residential area, escaping from the crime scene. Still on gangs, this security footage shows a group of guys hanging out in a residential area, and then suddenly, shots are being fired. The footage from different angles does not show who the agitator was, but it shows how the guys being attacked reacted. Some fled for cover, while others retaliated. Another body cam captures police officers in front of an apartment, hoping to see its occupant. The homeowner opens his door, and without questioning them about why they came, he calmly goes back to have a seat. like their visit was normal. Another man appears from a room and is also unfazed by the presence of these officers. So one of the officers walks into the house, following this occupant who was on his phone, and then both officers proceed to arrest this occupant. But then the once quiet and calm encounter becomes violent as the occupants struggle with the officers. In the heat of the moment, the suspect grabs an officer's gun and shoots the officer. In an attempt to neutralize the situation, the cops shoot the criminal multiple times. The next scene is very disturbing, as notorious Minnesota Somalia gang member Ahmed Jama records himself assaulting an unconscious woman in his car. The thug slaps her multiple times and then proceeds to grope her before ending the video. On November 9, 2023, at 10:30 a.m., this New Jersey cop was attending to a traffic incident when Bradley Beach Police Chief Leonard Guida showed up unexpectedly dressed casually, and the sergeant, William Major, said he was drunk again. The police chief tried to take the sergeant away from the scene to criticize him for wearing a jacket with peeling police lettering, but this ended in an altercation as the chief was still trying to stop the sergeant from working. The patrol officer slams the chief on the hood of a patrol car during this altercation while accusing him of being drunk again. This led to the boss instantly relieving the officer of his duties on the spot. Security cameras caught a Wisconsin teenager, Quantrell D. Schwartzlow, escaping from the Rock County Sheriff's Office in Janesville by diving headfirst out of a window while wearing handcuffs. He had been taken from his high school classroom on October 18th and arrested for suspicion of strangulation in an assault that happened on August 1st, 2019. In the video footage, Schwartzlow can be seen waiting by the window for his chance. When the detective leaves the room, he quickly opens the blinds, pushes the window open, and jumps out from a height of 12 feet. Another camera captures him sprinting across the lawn as he makes his getaway. When the detective returned after about 14 minutes, he found the room empty with the window wide open and reacted with surprise. Body cameras show a cop walking towards a car that was pulled over. On getting to the car, the young driver was on the phone explaining to another person that she was pulled over for reasons unknown to her, even though she was driving at the speed limit. The cop tells her why they pulled her over, and when asked for appropriate documentation, the young lady had none of that. The lady starts acting suspicious as she gives silly excuses for questions being asked, and so the cop tells her to step out of the car. On coming out, the police officer tries detaining her, but the hysteric driver gets agitated and starts screaming. The officers later arrested her, and she was charged with driving without a license. This body camera, taken from two different angles, shows an officer-involved shooting near Patton Park on April 12, 2023. Multiple police officers were deployed to arrest a suspect. On getting to the suspect's location, he was armed with a knife and tried running from the officers. An officer lets go of his dog to chase down the criminal, and in no time, the dog caught up with him, but in the heat of the moment, the suspect was about to stab the dog before officers took him out. Another body cam shows a cop pull over in a residential area, and he immediately beckons on a passerby. When he tries searching for the young man in white t-shirts and red shorts, the suspect takes off and the cop follows in a foot race. The young man heads for the road and is picked up by a white sedan, but in the last minute, the cop holds on to the suspect, who still manages to escape. The dashcam video shows the moments leading up to a Camden County shooting Leonard Cure, who was recently exonerated after he was wrongfully incarcerated for 16 years. The officer pulls Leonard over for allegedly overspeeding, leaving Leonard unaware of his offense. The two get into a heated argument that turns violent, and in the heat of the moment, the cop shoots the ex-convict in self-defense. A civilian records the moment when people were fleeing from Jack's Beach during a shoot on St. Patrick's Day. He laid flat on the flood plain, capturing what was happening until the police arrived. The car dashcam captures Deputy Jay Repetto and Corporal Jameson Trout arriving at the scene where Pierre Alexander Shelton, the suspect, starts shooting with an AK-47. Shelton's gunfire hit Trout's car, making it unable to move. As Shelton kept shooting and moving forward, he hit Deputy Repetto in the arm. The chase ended near Ithaca Elementary School in Villa Rica because of a crash. After crashing, the suspects ran away and then started shooting at another officer, but he got hit twice. The next video shows this police officer telling a running suspect to get on ground, but the man fearlessly ignores them and then enters a store. The officer runs after the suspect, and upon seeing that the running suspect had a gun, the officer opens fire. Another piece of footage from one of the cops shows another angle of how the scene unfolded. It turns out that when the suspect entered the store, the police officer tased him but then spotted the gun that the suspect held. This led to other officers firing multiple times at the suspect. This is video from the body cam of a Douglas County deputy when he was faced with a split-second decision. He thought he was helping a stranded motorist, but instead, a man with a rifle got out of the driver's side door. With less than a second to think, the cop fires back at the suspect before calling for aid. It turned out that the officer's bullet met its mark, and the motorist was wounded. The scene starts intense as a cop quickly gets out of his car to chase an armed car theft suspect, and when the suspect tries to evade the officer's body camera records how the officer fired at the fleeing man multiple times before arresting him. In the doorbell video, this elderly man is seen walking to the front door, ringing the doorbell, and then the house owner answers asking why the old man was there. Both men, apparently brothers, talked briefly about another family member's whereabouts before the visitor pulled out a gun from his jacket and fired the guest, ending his life. The criminal, Jeffrey, then entered the house and fired his brother's wife too. A neighbor called 911 in a panicked state, unsure if he heard gunshots. Over the next 13 minutes, the doorbell camera recorded Jeffrey Roberts coming in and out of the house while police arrived. Jeffrey left the house briefly, then returned carrying a bag and a shotgun as he paced around the front walkway, talking on the phone. The recorded conversation was hard to understand because of the loud smoke alarms inside the house. Police later said Jeffrey set the home on fire using road flares. He mentioned turtles and his bank account on the phone before the camera went dark again. Later, when officers came, Jeffrey ran out of the house toward the street, firing at them. The officers fired back, and Jeffrey was taken down. Fortunately, none of the officers were hurt. Fargo police were responding to a regular traffic accident on 25th Street South when Mohammed Barakat, 37, started shooting at officers and first responders with a .223 caliber rifle. Officers Andrew Dotus and Tyler Hawes were critically injured by gunfire. Officer Wallen bravely approached Barakat's vehicle, but tragically, he was fatally injured by Barakat. Wallen's training officer, Zach Robinson, exchanged gunfire with Barakat, calling for backup as Barakat continued to reach for his weapons even after being struck. During the chaos, bystander Carly Coswick, involved in the initial crash, was shot by Barakat. As Barakat turned towards Coswick, Officer Robinson saw an opportunity to stop him and fired multiple rounds, ultimately hitting Barakat 21 times out of 31 fired shots. Minnetonka police officers were patrolling Cedar Lake Road and Mayflower Avenue when they noticed a vehicle speeding at 60 mph in a 40 mph zone without a front license plate. They tried to pull over the vehicle with lights and sirens, but it didn't stop and instead sped up, even crossing into oncoming traffic to pass another car. The officers then found out the vehicle was reported stolen. The chase continued with speeds exceeding 80 mph. The officers tried a maneuver called a pity to stop the car, but it didn't work. Eventually, the vehicle went the wrong way onto Highway 169, leading to the pursuit being called off for safety reasons. However, law enforcement kept track of the vehicle to protect other drivers. Despite the pursuit being called off, the vehicle crashed into another car at Jordan Avenue and Cedar Lake Road. The driver was arrested and taken to the hospital with complaints of back and leg pain, but otherwise he wasn't seriously hurt. The victim in the other car was conscious but badly injured, with 2 broken hips and a collapsed lung. Deputies with body cameras from the HCSO were patrolling Beacon Meadows Park when they came across a suspect who had been banned from the park the day before. Deputies asked him to leave, and for over 20 minutes they tried to calm the situation down, but Carpenter refused to obey their commands and kept putting his hands in and out of his coat pockets. Despite repeated questions, Carpenter claimed he was not armed. The deputies then used their tasers on Carpenter, causing him to fall to the ground. However, while on the ground, Carpenter fired 3 shots, hitting 1 deputy. When Carpenter was arrested, deputies discovered a firearm and a knife in his coat. In this dashcam footage, a black police vehicle can be seen running into a car on high speed, causing the car to swerve and then stop. The suspect jumps out of the car and immediately runs up the hill. A cop highlights from his vehicle, hoping to chase down the criminal, but but a K9 dog managed by another officer delays the pursuit. Another police vehicle drives uphill in pursuit of the fleeing man, who is now heading for the express. Unaware of the crossing suspect, an 18-wheeler truck almost crushed him as he was able to jump off the road in time, but this affected his momentum, leading to his arrest a minute later. This video shows another police K9 biting an officer who attacks a civilian who, in the video, did not do anything wrong. This police vehicle was in a high chase when the suspect pulled an unexpected car stunt and started firing at the cop's windshield. In an attempt to neutralize the whole event, the cops exited the vehicle and returned fire before approaching the now disarmed suspect. There was a report that someone with a knife was in Istanbul. From an overhead bridge, this person recorded how when the police arrived at the scene, the person attacked them but was immediately stopped when an officer fired him in the legs. This officer's body camera shows how he was checking for an occupier in a house but could not see any, so in an attempt to search other areas of the property, this pit bull, who had been hiding all along, suddenly attacks the officer, who shoots it in self-defense. In this video, a female officer is seen walking down the street, and then suddenly, a man wielding a hammer walks toward her. She tells him to put away his hammer, but the terrifying man attacks her instead. The female officer shot multiple times at her attacker, who was clearly not intimidated by her. These police officers approach a group of young men standing by the roadside. In an attempt to disperse the men, who were probably causing unrest amongst passers-by, the suspects became violent and attacked both police officers before leaving the scene. In another unsettling video, a man records himself being approached by a police officer whom he told that he was going into the station to report to a supervisor, and then the officer attacks the civilian. Protesters captured the moment when police officers attacked Black Lives Matter protesters, including a man in a wheelchair in downtown Los Angeles. One of the victims of this unfortunate incident even had a seizure. The San Pablo police received a 911 call from a woman at a home on Dover Avenue. She wanted help with her husband, Andre Smith, who she said was showing signs of schizophrenia. She was worried about how he would react when the police arrived. When officers got there, Smith had locked himself in a room. They tried talking to him, but he wouldn't respond. They found out that Smith didn't actually live there with his family. The woman said Smith wasn't being violent and would call the police again if he needed help. Later in the day, the woman called 911 again because Smith had come out of the room and was bothering her. She said Smith was outside and didn't want him to come back. While the dispatcher was on the phone, they heard Smith in the background saying he would unalive police officers and make them take his life too. There were still family members and children inside the house. When officers arrived, they tried talking to Smith in the front yard. He ignored their orders and hid in the side yard. Smith started throwing pieces of brick at the officers. The officers used tasers and beanbag rounds, but these didn't work. Smith then grabbed a folding chair as a shield and a 3-foot metal pole. He charged at an officer with the pole, but the officer managed to dodge it, and another officer neutralized him. On December 30, 2023, Rhode Island authorities were searching for a person linked to a robbery. Trooper Joseph Godbout saw the vehicle at a mobile gas station in Dayville, CT. The driver, later identified as Ruben Mueller, was outside the car. When Trooper Godbout asked for Mueller's license, Mueller said he didn't have it and ran towards a nearby Taco Bell restaurant. Trooper Godbout chased Mueller and used a taser, causing Mueller to briefly fall down. Mueller quickly got up and kept running. Near the Taco Bell driveway, Mueller ran into a truck and fell again. Trooper Godbout tried to use the taser again, but then Mueller pulled out a revolver from his ankle. Trooper Godbout then fired one shot that hit Mueller in the chest. In this body cam footage, 35-year-old Rakeem Tillery, who was accused of allegedly assaulting someone with a firearm earlier, was stopped by troopers who identified the car in which he drove. As soon as the suspect parked, he began firing at the troopers, who also retaliated and hit Tillery. The suspect passed away on the scene.